what is the process for closing down a nonprofit organization? Are there any circumstances under which a nonprofit might shift into a for-profit?
What a fun question. So this is actually one of those things where there's no gray area at all.
Oh, okay.
So when you first get your 501c3, when you have to apply to the IRS to get your 501c3, you have to fill out a form that's the Form 1023. Or if you've done it in the last 20 years, maybe you filled out the Form 1023EZ. And in both of those forms, there is a section called the dissolution clause that you're required to tell the IRS up front, like when you're applying for your nonprofit status from the IRS. You have to tell the IRS up front, if we go away, this is what we're going to do with all of our assets. And there are some very specific rules around that. Like you have to give it to a nonprofit that's doing something similar to what you're doing. You have to, or if you can't find anybody similar to what you're doing, you have to give it to either the federal government, the state government, or a local government for them to use for a public purpose. And whatever that means, you'd have to certainly negotiate with somebody. You can't just send somebody a check. You'd have to probably negotiate with someone what it actually meant. But it's really talking about your assets, which is crazy, right? So when you think about your financial statements as a nonprofit or as any business, really, you have the section of your balance sheet. The top part of your balance sheet is your assets, and that's the money that's in your bank account. But not only is it the money that's in your bank account, it's any investments you might have, it's any property you own, anything that the organization owns, including like the copier machine or the computer that the nonprofit bought so that the ED can send emails. Like all of those things are also your assets. And those are included in that bucket of all of the things that you need to figure out a way to get to another nonprofit organization. So, for the person asking the question, go and dig out your 1023. Somebody has it saved on a hard drive somewhere. If not, you can call the IRS or email the IRS and ask them for a copy of it. They will hassle you. They will also probably charge you money to make the copy and send it back to you. But that's the document that says, in the event that we no longer are going to be a nonprofit and we have assets remaining, this is what's going to happen to our remaining assets. It probably says something that, like, the funny thing is that on the instructions for the 1023, there's actually like a sample dissolution clause. And I think of all the 1023s that I've looked at, like almost everybody uses that sample verbatim because it's like, well, if I write this, the IRS isn't going to ask, right? Because it's the exact same thing. And one of the reasons that they put the sample there is because they're like, if you write this, we'll say it's okay. And if it's anything else, they're going to say, well, we need to think about this. So it probably says you have to find a nonprofit that's doing similar work and you need to give them all of your assets. From a practical standpoint, I mean, you probably need to get an accountant or an attorney involved because there are lots of bits and pieces, and you want to make sure that you dissolve everything properly, and then nobody's coming after the board of directors 3 years later for like, oh, the gas bill never got turned off, and so here you owe $750 or whatever it is, right? For the second part of your question, are there any circumstances under which a nonprofit might shift into a for-profit organization? Not directly, no. So if you've got a nonprofit and you wanted to convert it to a for-profit, there's no way to do that. You would have to do the dissolution clause and get all of the assets out the door. Once you've done that, there's really nothing stopping you from starting a brand new business and like kind of continuing what you were doing from a for-profit context. But you cannot move any of the existing assets, including things like name recognition. Like if that showed up on your balance sheet, you couldn't just take the name and convert it to a for-profit name because that belonged to the other organization as an asset and then got distributed out. So if your nonprofit was called the XYZ Foundation, you can't dissolve it and then immediately start another for-profit called the XYZ Foundation because the IRS would come and eat your lunch. That's just not something that's allowed, and rightly so. You don't want to confuse donors into thinking that what they're giving money to is still a nonprofit organization, even though it's been converted into a for-profit by basically dissolving and restarting.
So I want to jump in with a couple questions, Andy, just because I'm curious about how do donor restrictions and like endowments get handled in the case of closing down a nonprofit? Do those restrictions get passed on to another nonprofit? Do you know?
Yeah, they do. Because the donor isn't necessarily restricting the money to you. They're restricting the money for a purpose, and the purpose would stay with the donor restriction. So if you did have assets and some of those were something like an endowment or something like, for a permanent fund or something that's just like we're giving you money to do this particular purpose, you're going to have to find a nonprofit to dissolve into that can do those things, or else you have to call the donor back and say, we need to get this unrestricted. Usually that's not going to be the case. Usually the donor is going to say, nope, you need to find somebody else. Let me tell you who you can give it to, right? If you have that conversation with the donor. Endowments are a little more complicated because the endowment was intended to many times to ensure the longevity of the organization, to make sure that it has money in perpetuity. So that's why, again, you need an attorney involved, because you want to make sure that everything's done right and you don't get the donors for the endowment angry at whatever the successor organization is and start suing people, because that never ends well.
No, it doesn't. I was thinking a little bit about years ago, I was involved with an organization that I was a volunteer for an organization that shut down. And I remember it was a small organization to begin with and just couldn't ever get its legs underneath it. So ultimately dissolved. But when it did this, I think everybody was shocked at the amount of, even with a small amount of assets, the amount of detail and process to have to go through, whether it was, obviously all the necessary paperwork, canceling, a lease agreement, right? Like writing, making sure that employment notification for employees, if there were any employees or termination of employees, how they did that. Like there was a lot of layers. So I really appreciate what you said about making sure you get like advisors to help you with it, because there's a lot of little details and paperwork that you don't want to like shirk or just out of not knowing better. The other thing that I remember at that time that organization was a little surprised with was the idea, they were surprised that they had to do 2 990s for even the year. So like I think they only operated a couple months into their new fiscal year, but so they had to do like the 990 for the past year, and then kind of the 2 months into the new fiscal, even though it wasn't a full fiscal year. And they were like, what? We still have to do this? This is crazy, right? So
yeah, it's like we're trying to close down because we don't have any money, and now you're making us pay more money to get somebody to do a 990 for us. Yeah, we say this all the time. Like nonprofits are not. This is not a business on easy mode. It's absolutely a business on hard mode. So you have to kind of go into it with eyes open that everything is more complicated for you.
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board. Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing. Nonprofit resources.
Welcome to Nonprofit Everything, the podcast where hosts Andy Shurick and Stacey Wedding answer your questions about all things nonprofit.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. I'm Andy Shurick. I'm here with my partner in crime, Stacey Wedding, and we're here to answer a bunch of nonprofit questions that you send us. And you do that by emailing them to us or finding us on one of the socials if you can figure out how to do that. It's usually at Nonprofit Everything. That's usually a good guess is where to find us on those. Also, if you're on the Nonprofit Everything webpage, there's a nice Ask a Question button that you can click, and that'll go straight to us as well. Stacey, what are you excited? Are you going on vacation this summer? Are you doing anything fun at all?
The way you asked that kind of made it sound like you think I'm doing nothing fun at all, Andy.
Really? I'm sorry, I didn't mean.
Am I really that
weird.
much of a dud? No, just kidding. I do work a lot, folks, so I understand where his question's coming from. No, I actually am going to do I have a work trip to Colorado, but might add a couple of fun days while I'm there. And then in July, I think I'm going on a girls trip with my mom and her bestie, and we're gonna go to wine country, so in California. So excited about that. It'll just be a few days, so nothing major, but enough to get away. How about you?
Yeah, we got a couple little things planned. Nothing too exciting. No big vacations. I think we're feeling the economy right now, to be honest. So, but it's nice to have the kids out of school. That'll be fun.
Yes. Well, see, you've got kids. I think you say it's nice now, but what I really want to know is if you'll be saying that in another month or 2 months, you'll be like, let them go back.
Oh yeah, by the time school starts to come around again, I'm very excited about kids being
Right?
back in school for
I mean,
sure.
it sounds awful, but all my friends with kids, like they love the summertime with the kids at the first few weeks, and then it's like I'm over it. It just like
Yeah,
holiday breaks and all that stuff. So
exactly. Well, enjoy the episode.
hey, podcast listeners, it's Stacey Wedding here. Hey, I wanted to invite you to an upcoming virtual workshop that I'm hosting on June 17th. It's on the 6 types of working genius, this productivity and team building framework that I was certified in a couple of years ago and that I'm super passionate about. It's really been a game changer for me and my work with clients, and a lot of nonprofit teams that I've worked with have found it to be pretty cool and great way to get people working together more effectively, productively, and with less of the dysfunction that oftentimes comes up in teams. So I hope you'll join me. You can find details below in the link in the show notes. Hey, Andy, here is a budgeting question for you. What is the best way to create a budget for a fundraising program from scratch? The organization does not have a history or CRM. And as a startup, we haven't had any formal fundraising activities. So I do not have data to work off from that. Also, what are common expenses fundraising budget should include?
I like this one. I love budget questions. We need more budget questions.
Oh, I know. You get to nerd out a little bit, right?
I know. So in general, so we'll start here. When you're up and running, when you're sort of moving and people, you have programs involved, you've got a professional team that may be working with you, like budgeting is a completely different animal, because then what you do, the right way to do it, because, the best way is to actually ask people what they need. Say like, okay, so these are the goals of our organization from a really straightforward perspective. These are the goals of our organization that we're going to need to reach. We've said we're going to do this at the end of the year. If we're going to do that, we're going to need some money. We're going to need to do some work, and we're going to need to pay some people. So what does everybody need in order to get to these goals at the end of the year? So it's a really clear way to say, this is our target. What do you need to reach for the target? Inevitably, it all comes in and you're like, oh gosh, that's never going to work. Right? It doesn't look like we're capable of raising this much money that fast. So what do we move? Do we say, okay, we can't hit the goals? How do we solve for that by moving things around? Right. So that's the best way to do it once you're moving. The hard part is when you don't have any information and you're either starting a new program from scratch, because this is the same problem with a new program from scratch, or starting a fundraising program from scratch. So the good news is that the fundraising programs are a lot easier to figure out than a program. So if you wanted to say like, oh, we've got this great new idea, we're going to do this for this group of people, what's it going to cost us to do it? That's a much harder conversation, because you need to like think of all of the bits and pieces individually. With fundraising, luckily enough, people have been doing this for years and years and years. So you're not the first. The best part is that you're not the first people to ever try to raise money. It's happened. Lots of organizations over time have done all of the things, right? All of the things you need to do to be able to raise money. And so what you need to do is you need to lean on either someone who's going to help you put together a fundraising plan. So there are consultants, there are people out there that will assist you in developing a fundraising plan, which can be as small as like, tell us what we should do just kind of in general, and we'll figure it all the way out, all the way to the other side, which is, we don't know anything at all, and we need you to explain every single step of the way. And where are we going to raise money? Who are we going to get the money from? How are we going to approach them, right? So it's this big continuum from like, just give us some hints, all the way to, can you do it all for us, right? So depending on what you pick, you're going to need additional assistance. So that's one way to do it, is to find a consultant. The other way to do it is to start, and this is Andy's preferred method, is to start to be really annoying to everyone you know, which is to say, hey, I'm starting this new organization. We need to put a fundraising plan together. Can I buy you lunch and ask you like 1,000 questions, right? And then figure out from these conversations, like what you need to do to put together. Because I don't know about you, Stacey. Actually, Stacey, do know you, Stacey. I don't know who the listeners may not have the same opinion, but I know Stacey and I both do. If someone asks us something, like if someone we know says, "Hey, can you help me with something?" 100% of the time, we're going to say, "Okay."
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
We're
softies,
like when I was,
Andy. We're softies. Don't tell too many people.
I know, but I think most people feel this way. Like if
I
you're
think so too.
like, if you're working in an organization, and I know like from the CFO perspective, like there's so little good information about CFO related things, and CFOs and a lot of times are not the most social people. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Oh, really? That shocks me, Andy. Really? You're kidding
Like
me.
Maybe people that are like super into spreadsheets aren't necessarily the ones that are like out having conversations all the time. So this is so you sort of feel like in that role a lot of times that you're kind of all by yourself. But the reality is if you called one up and said, and I did this I've done this my entire career. If I don't know something, I will call someone who does know it and just go, "Hey, can I ask you a dumb question?" Right. And then just launch in occasionally, like I've talked to some people who are jerks, but in like 95% of the time, they just tell me what I want to know,
of course,
totally for free, without even me having to buy them lunch, right?
Totally,
totally. They're like, "Oh yeah, I do it like this. Oh yeah, we did it this way," right? So lean on, like, start if you don't have that network, start developing that network, because there are lots of nonprofit professionals out there. Start talking to that network about what it is that you want to do, and I guarantee you, within a short period of time, you will have something that's at least a ballpark. And that's kind of the other secret to budgeting, is that it's always wrong. Like there's no budget in the world that's correct. Every single budget is wrong. You might be wrong on the we overestimated. You might be wrong on the we underestimated, but like the getting it right part is almost impossible. So you have to be comfortable with like a band of outcomes. Like what's the band of outcomes? It's going to be this range, and we have to be okay with it. So the level of stress about creating an accurate budget should go way down, because it's not going to be right. Your job is to get it as close as you can within the bounds of like, well, that's all we knew, right? And you're going to do your work to make sure it's as close as possible, but it's never going to be exact. So don't freak out about not knowing what it is.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit to, I'm looking at, we don't know exactly this organization, its staffing structure. I'm assuming very tiny, or maybe one person, right? Like one person based on the question. But can you also speak to allocating in the budget, the fact that this person will be spending some of their time on development? Is that something they should even worry about at this stage? What would you do for a small organization with that advice or that question?
I think, so the hard part is that you do need to keep track of that, but you don't necessarily have to keep track of it in advance. So one of the things you're required to do as a nonprofit is to create a thing called a functional expense statement, which says like, this is how much of my time I spent doing program activities. This is how much of my time I spent doing development activities. This is how much was just management and direct, like admin stuff, right? So everybody's required to figure those percentages out. That's where we get the Dan Pallotta calculation, right? Where it's like the program, like how much of it is spent on programming? Yeah. Like, well, the appropriate amount, leave me alone. So you have to keep track of it, but in advance, I don't think it's important. I think recognizing that as you put the plan together, I feel like it's going to sort of come out in the wash, like, because you're going to need to know, like, are you considering direct mail? Is that something that's part of your plan? Then it's got really clear expenses. Are you just thinking about, we're just going to try to find a group of people that are willing to fund this? So how are you going to find them? What mechanism are you going to use to contact them? Are these lunches? Are they emails? Like all those then sort of suggest how much money you're going to make from it, and then how much it's going to cost to do in the first place. So like, I think the plan itself, if you've got a good plan, and you by all means, don't jump into this without a good plan. So the development of the plan should probably be your top priority right now. And then the budget is just what comes out of the plan. So you might need to plan to budget it, right? You need a budget to do the budget, right? So that's the seed money that you're going to need to get the place sort of up and running, is like, we're going to need a development plan. Who's going to do that? And then it's going to tell us what we need to, how many people we need to hire based on our goals.
And I know that this person asked about sort of what are common expenses in a fundraising budget. And that's a really hard question to answer without knowing what the plan is, right? Because, Andy and I have seen it all from, micro tiny events to macro galas, which, we oftentimes poo-poo for a variety of reasons. To look at our other episodes for that. We also talk about, whether is it a direct mail? Direct mail is expensive. Hiring a direct mail company. If you do online giving, like those platforms, oftentimes there's a fee or there's money involved. So much is going to depend on that. I mean, I think there's some baseline things that always exist, regardless of what direction or activities you do or what your plan says. Is, you're probably going to need some money for, I don't know, printing, maybe not as much these days because so much is done digitally, postage. If there's donor visits, right? Do you bake that in? Do you eat the cost of that? Or does the organization have a budget or will the donor just pay for it, right? Why are you laughing? Why are you laughing, Andy?
Because it's the image of taking a donor to lunch and then just sitting quietly while she gets out her purse.
Yeah.
That is the worst image I've ever come up with.
It really is. And
you're doing it wrong. You're absolutely doing it wrong.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, oh yikes, right? So, I was like, no, if you do a little thank you gift or a holiday thing or a thank you cards or whatever, if you do end up with a CRM system. So those are the kinds of baseline. If there's travel expenses for some reason to go see a donor, those are the things that are kind of, more standard that you see in almost every kind of development or fundraising budget. But you're right, Andy, the plan is where it is at. And also, I don't know if you would advise this because, as you said, no budget is ever correct and accurate and completely it's your best guess, right? Based on whatever info you do have. But I would probably go more conservative if I were budgeting this. And maybe that's a Stacey thing and you can poo-poo this, Andy, but I would probably go more conservative because I'd be I'm just starting out. It takes time to build traction. So I'm going to do my best guess, but I'm not going to expect to hit this out of the park from the get-go because I don't even have a development plan or fundraising activities that we've even done. So I don't know what I don't know. So what do you think? Is that flawed thinking? Is that a little glasses half empty thinking?
It's not my favorite, only because when you go, you come up with a conservative estimate, right? But so if we're talking about revenue, we're going to raise money and we're going to have a conservative estimate. What you're doing is you're intentionally gaming the system. You're saying, this isn't my best guess. This is less than my best guess because I want to give myself wiggle room because if I miss on the high side, if I raise more money, people are like, yay. So that's a good way to miss. And if I miss on the low side, people are going to be like, you're terrible at your job and we need to find another person to do it. So that's so the amount of pain you get from missing on one side is very high. And the adulation, and because as humans, we discount good things and we concentrate more on bad things, it means that every time we try to say we're going to come in lower, we automatically go even lower than that. So our estimates get even worse. If you've ever been, I don't know, once I was running and I got bit by a dog. So this old lady, she's walking this dog. I run by. The dog just is a little dog. It jumps up and it bit me. And from now on, anytime I'm out running, if there's a dog, I am on the other side of the street. If I have to stop and wait for a bunch of cars to go by, I'm going to go on the other side of the street because I don't want to get bit by a dog again. That's stuck in my brain forever, right?
Yeah.
But I don't remember all the times where the dog was happy and did something cute, right?
Of course not.
I'm sure 95% of those dogs are not going to bite me, but I'm still going to only remember the bad thing. So I think instead what I would think is one of the things that you need to focus the most on if you're coming up with a brand new nonprofit idea and you're thinking of all the programs you want to do and all the good you're going to be doing in the community is we spend an awful lot of time thinking about the expenses side of the budget, what we're going to spend. And there's a reason I didn't answer that half of the question too, is because that's not important. It's like, it doesn't matter what the things are, except that you need to put them in a budget. And we're just sort of trained that we need a budget because everybody asks for them. So that's like, to us, then that becomes the most important part of it. The most important part of it is how much money you can raise and how you're going to do it. You should spend, if you're going to spend, you should spend 80% of your time focusing on the revenue side of that budget, where the money's going to come from, who we're going to talk to, what methods are we going to use to raise that money, how much do we think we're going to get from each one of these individual people. Like, it's a really big conversation to have, and it's going to take an awful lot of thought, but you spend 80% of your time thinking about that side of it, and only 20% of your time thinking about how you're going to spend the money, because that's not as important. It's important for outcomes for sure, right? If you do things in a dumb way, but you're not going to do things in a dumb way. You're going to, like any good nonprofit, you're going to try to be as efficient as you possibly can to reach your maximum level of effectiveness. But in order to do any of that, you still have to raise the money first. So you should spend right now, while we're thinking about our brand new nonprofit idea, we should be focusing almost all of our time and energy on the fundraising side of it, on the revenue generation side of it, and how we're going to make this thing bring in enough money to be able to do anything at all, and leave the second half of that, the expenses half of that, to some other question that's going to just work itself out later. It's much easier to control how it's like your faucet in your house. Like, if you live someplace where you've got like bad water pressure, there's literally nothing you can do about it. If the water is not coming into your house at a certain pressure, it doesn't matter what you do to the shower, it's still going to just dribble on you, right? You can't fix it at that level. You can slow it down. You can always just like turn this faucet on a little bit if it's coming out really, really hard, but you can never make it come out harder than it's already coming into your house. That's the exact same analogy for fundraising and revenue and expenses for an organization. If the money's coming in hard, you can always throttle it back and say, well, we don't need to spend all of this right now. Like, we can be really efficient with it. But if the money's not coming in, like, the faucet doesn't do anything.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a good analogy. I still, though, I don't know if I'm like belaboring this, but I have to ask it because, all right, because I probably am belaboring. So my apologies.
That's the point of the podcast.
Except that is the point of the podcast.
We're just going to belabor things.
For those who don't know, and we go off on riffs and tangents, and we kind of like to just, I don't know, pontificate with each other. But no, I hear what you're saying. For an established organization or an established fundraising budget, that people make it's an error to try to be super conservative because you want to outshine your budget and you want to succeed. I 150% agree with that. I guess I'm just like, but this is a first time fundraising budget. I want you to be ambitious, but I want you to be realistic. I guess I don't know what it is about it, but I'm feeling like I don't want you to be super heartbroken or disappointed. Maybe it comes from that. Like, it takes time. I guess that's my point. Like, I guess I just want whoever like is creating this to know, put your best foot forward, come up with the plan, think through all the details that Andy just mentioned, right? But it takes time, and like fundraising, a good fundraising and development takes time, and make sure your board knows that, because I guess I want every board member to listen to this episode, because here's my challenge is I hear too many boards go, yep, didn't hit budget once again. Yep. And look at it as a staff failure instead of really understanding why, or understanding that budget is your best guess given your data. And so I don't know, Andy, maybe we're saying the same thing. I think I still am like, okay, just be realistic that this doesn't happen overnight when you are budgeting.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. I mean, and for one of the reasons that you mentioned is that like the board is going to get on you if you miss the wrong way. Yeah. If you miss the right way, like I've told this story before. Why once somebody worked for an organization, somebody died and left us money. They gave us a chunk of money, and the board wasn't like, "Yay!" Instead, the board was like, "Okay, you need to do a new budget,
right,
to show how we're going to spend this money." It was like, "What? Stop! Like it's a windfall. It's like just salt it away. It's a rainy day fund." And they're like, "Nope, absolutely not. Spend it right now." So so they're never happy. It doesn't matter whether they're just angrier if you don't make it. So I think You're right. In organizations that have been around for a long time, like you can trust the development people to know to a very specific level. Like if you're talking about a specific donor and a specific gift, and you say, what's the likelihood that you're going to get that gift from 0% to 100%, and they'll go like 72, and they're like exactly right.
Yes.
Like for the development people, good development people, even mediocre development people are excellent at being able to tell you what the likelihood of getting a gift is. And so if you're doing your budget based on like gift likelihood and things like that, which I know we've talked about in the past, you could come up with a really accurate estimate that you're probably not going to miss by much. But I think, Stacey, to your point, like, don't just imagine that everybody you talk to is going to give you money. That's crazy. And that's never going to be the case. But at the same time, I would caution, like, don't use your lack of planning as an excuse for not having good results. Like, you should really think deeply about how your development plan's gonna work, how you're gonna raise the money, exactly who you're gonna get it from. And if you've done that and you're honest with yourself, you're gonna be pretty close. You're gonna be in the ballpark. And if you don't like being bit by dogs, like, then yeah, shave it down a little bit just so that you can feel better about that.
I love it. I love it. And one final thought is I wanted to give a couple of concrete resources that we can put links in the show notes. So for development budgeting and development planning, there's some great resources through the Association of Fundraising Professionals. They even have, I think they actually have a little guidebook that's how to create your development budget. I think they have one that's how to create your development plan. I think you don't even have to be a member. I think those are maybe $30 or I don't know, something. So it's not a huge expense. So that might be helpful to you. And we'll find whatever ones of those exist out there, we'll find. If you are a member, you might also look at membership into Association of Fundraising Professionals as an organization that not only gives you a mix of community members that Andy was talking about, like that you can pick their brains and say what's working for you, because these AFP chapters exist around the country. So almost every community has one, and they have little lunch meetings, breakfast, where you can get together and learn from each other in addition to guest speakers. So yes, AFP, you can thank me later for the big plug, but yes, no, I actually believe in it. I believe that it has some great resources for what you're looking for. There's also something called the Nonprofit Leadership Lab, which is been pretty popular, and it was developed by a national consultant, Joan Gary, and it's really it's actually designed for smaller nonprofits. So those that have budgets that are usually less than $1 million or less than 500,000. And so you have this entire online community through that of people sharing knowledge and supporting each other, as well as a ton of online resources around this kind of stuff, like creating your first development plan. So those are just two things to look into. I don't know current cost for either of those. So there will be, hey, you can put that in your budget. There will be a cost involved. Hey there, listeners. We appreciate you listening to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. And we also appreciate all you do to make our world, our communities a better place each and every day. You make the world a better place. And that does not happen often, right? Especially in today's day and age, when all you hear are the negative news stories and the media and the awful things. So thank you for giving us some hope and inspiration. You make us energized to do this podcast, and we just want to give you a shout out for that. And so as a friendly reminder or a very healthy nudge, I'm going to nag a little bit, send us a question, right? This podcast works from your questions. As you know, it's all about the questions you send us. And so whatever's on your mind, no matter how big, no matter how small, if you don't have a question, but you heard one in your office or at your staff meeting or at your board meeting, You can even do that. Just don't tell us the names, right? Because we're not going to rat anybody out. So anyways, send us your questions. Again, you can find us nonprofiteverything.com, on the socials at nonprofiteverything. You can, we've joked about pigeon carrier before. You can do that too. So with that said, thank you for joining, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.